It's time for part 2 of daily number 431, where we learn to be a better gamer. We learn to wear wrinkly shirts and have raggedy hair because we just don't care. And I have a squeaky chair. In part number 1, we literally looked at a simple ass opening where we kind of one-based all in. Yeah! Cool! You now have one TvT build in your arsenal. Maybe you'll win with it, maybe you'll just contain and take an expand and play it out normally. Either way, it's a pretty fun example to begin with, just so we start thinking about things like when to spend our scans, the information that we're getting, and what some of our goals are. And that big goal was the Banshee tank composition, letting us see over into the high grounds and blast our way to a 10-minute win against MMA. And now we're going to look at a more complicated game, but I do want to say that Puma, and actually just all of Evil Genius is nice enough to send their players out to the Red Bull LAN, which I'm delighted about. But given the structure of the Red Bull LAN, we didn't get to look at too many of Puma's games because he got knocked out pretty early on. So he's really good, and I love his style because it is attack-focused. Yes! And that's what makes him so fun to watch. So what we're going to do in this game is look at another different opening that not only has us being aggressive right at the start, but then has a nice transition where we continue to have some cool attack timings and we take MMA down. Aw, yeah. Now, let me note right off the bat that when you are on a map like Daybreak, it's very, very large. So, in Terran vs. Terran, I just want to pause for a moment and just suppose that we have a whole bunch of our siege tanks right here. Let's say we're Puma, we're down on the bottom left, we have all our siege tanks here. And ask yourself, where do you want to push? Do we try to work our way down here or up here? Or, I mean, what if we do move up to this top side and all of a sudden a bunch of Marines and tanks move up in and we're in terrible shape? Contrast that with, again, follow me on the minimap, contrast that with if we have our tanks positioned right here by his watchtower and then right here outside his third base over here. Come to my mouse on the bottom left, notice that if we just control these two positions, he's in a really rough spot. I mean, obviously he could maybe try to swing around with a drop, but for the bulk of his ground forces, he's in bad shape. In other words, we want to be really close to his side of the map with our tanks. How do we get that going? In general, on a large map, you either want to be very aggressive from the get-go and get yourself into a good position, or we want to be really defensive, so that way whenever we do perform our giganto-ass attack, we will have some incredible upgrades, some unit advantages, because we've been expanding a lot. And what makes this game a great example is that MMA is actually going to be going big-ass macro mode. And we're not going to look at his exact opening too much. We're primarily going to be looking at Puma. But still, it's good to reference back, and because if you're against a macro player, or it's one thing to be able to say how you'll perform against a macro player, and it's another thing to just demonstrate it. So again, gas on 12, barracks on 13. We already got warmed up to that in part 1. We see MMA's barracks is ahead, but we don't give a damn, because we're badasses. We're Puma today. I wonder if someone can keep a count of how many times I've said, "Aw, yeah," today. I've probably said that like 5, 6 times already. I'm just in a great mood, dude. So of course, right off the bat, barracks, command center, SCV tries to depart, and we're going to try to build a factory kind of off in a corner. We would like that not to be seen, but we don't really care too much. The important thing in this opening is that it goes down fast. In the last game, it was that it goes down eventually. The refinery that we got early in the last game is so we can start stockpiling our money early. Or excuse me, stockpiling our gas early on. In this build, we are not taking this second gas geyser. The build we're about to see is quite versatile on a variety of maps, but is largely good on maps with big distances. Puma tracks down, executes the SCV, excellent. Right off the bat, we're going to build a tech lab on the barracks, because it's the barracks that we want to be building the starport at. Boom. And notice, by the way, that building the tech lab first didn't mess up any of our timing because we had to wait for the factory to be done. Now here's something interesting. We have one Marine on the map as Puma. And ordinarily when people go for Banshee builds, they do the factory with the tech lab, but we're actually going to see Puma straight up go big Hellion production, 2 Hellions at a time. Also notice that from the Puma cam, we haven't scouted. We've held a watchtower, but we're scouting first with our Hellion. Very much so in the style of show. Now let me just briefly step on over here and note that we have a command center, we have a fast factory, MMA is kind of going for this tech expo combo. Again, big macro mode is all you really need to know. So immediately we go to this watchtower, we start building this Banshee. We are not getting a second geyser yet. We are only building one Marine at the start of the game. We're not really building anymore. We're using these Hellions to give us a little bit of control. And by the way, just as a general trick, a lot of times people will do this thing where, you know, they'll build an observer thinking, oh crap, I need to have an observer to scout him, but I also need an observer in case he goes Dark Templar. So I feel like I don't know if I should build one observer to scout him and save 100 gas, or if I should build 2 observers and make sure that I can have my main covered and his main covered. But then the annoying thing happens is that you build the observer for your main, and then you build the observer to scout with them, and ugh, you get there and he's not going DTs, and you feel like you've wasted an observer and lost 75 gas, which I arbitrarily rounded up to 100. But a really easy technique is you start building it, and right before it finishes, you cancel and just restart it. So you're always building. And then if you get to his base, and it turns out that he has no Dark Shrine, you just cancel it and leave it alone, and you saved yourself that 75 gas. Or if you get to the base and there is a Dark Shrine, then you let the observer finish. Pretty cool. The reason I bring that up here is that Puma, like if you're really worried and you don't know if you should build Marine 2 or not, generally you shouldn't, but you can always start the Marine and let it get halfway, and then cancel it and start it and let it get halfway. Blah, 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 blah. So, alright. Notice that we have not identified his build at all. We see nothing. We literally are going Hellion Banshee. We have 2 Hellions. We have 2 more queued up. And once we get a pair of Hellions, we start to advance forward. We roast a couple of things, and when we head up here, what we're really looking for is some sort of count of units. Is he going for, I mean, do we see a tech lab? Do we see a barracks with nothing? How many Marines do we have? This structure is almost a dead giveaway that he's going for some sort of tech-based play. Almost a straight dead giveaway. Now, in this particular circumstance, Puma did get the chance to waltz right on up into the base. But let me note that Puma doesn't really do that much damage. It's so easy to convince yourself that he is doing damage. We literally lose 2 Hellions for killing off a Marine or 2 and an SCV. Back home, we're going to build our Banshee straight. We're going to build that Banshee, and immediately, no matter what, we're going to go ahead and start a Viking. But before we start that Viking, we do this nice little swap. And this creates an incredible efficiency of our buildings. We build a Viking, and now we can start stim quite quickly. Now, I want to note something positionally about the map as we're here. The reason that we're building Hellions instead of Marines, I mean, Marines are obviously a good unit that you want to have in Terran vs. Terran, so building them up early is fine. But we want to have him as far pushed back defensive as he possibly can be. Remember at the start of the game when I talked about setting our siege tanks up here and beginning our pushes for here? Oh, well, if we have Hellions there, we've already gobbled up a whole bunch of control of the map. Look at MMA, holed up in his main base. And we're going to try to do a little bit of kiting. This is kind of the let's kill anything that we possibly can style. Marines are great. SCVs are great. We just want to keep him low on units. Here's the really important follow-up that Puma's going to be doing. He builds not 1, but 2 Vikings. Tries to do a little bit of poking at the front, not the critical period. You kind of know that you're going to end up losing that 1 Banshee. And that's actually okay. You just want to be able to do as much damage as possible, and it looks like we did. We managed to kill off a nice amount of workers. We killed off some Marines, too. But most importantly, you want to actually force him to build this Viking. This is actually great if we force him to build a Viking. It sort of narrows down the amount of stuff he can actually be doing. In particular, it narrows down his ability to attack. I mean, honestly, in our position, we look and we see we have 3 Marines. And we have all these buildings and this tech coming out. But it's okay, because we know that we forced him to build a Viking. And then Puma's going to use this sort of dud factory to just add on the reactor. Now, in terms of the big-ass macro mode, look at MMA going for 1-1 upgrades. He's going for an expand. He's going to be getting a third base soon. He is really focusing on the long-term play. Like, really, really, really. And we almost look like we're in kind of a weak position. But we have total map control thanks to these Hellions. And you heard me say just a moment ago, it's really important that we build 2 Vikings. Obviously, we force him to build 1 Viking, so we'll win the 2 versus 1 battle. But more importantly, Vikings are just a good, fast unit that allows us to move around the map. At this point, MMA is desperate to get some kind of map control. We started seizing it right at the start. He moves out with this 1 Viking, which he should feel fairly comfortable doing. But now we have 2 Vikings out in Pumaville. And we can just easily kind of retake that. Any instance our opponent tries to go for map control, we swat it aside. And how do we make up for this? Well, when we build our 2 medevacs, we exploit this map control by going for the straight drop with the stim. Combat shield coming up as well. Meanwhile, we back up and we get tanks the instant we get our medevac production coming up. The 3 barracks, we built barracks 2 and 3 at some point. I probably should have said that. Let me actually just briefly come back to the 6-minute mark. There we go. I saw someone in chat asking when did this expansion go down. It went down when we were still doing this Hellion Banshee stuff. We just went for a fairly quick expansion. And it's good to build this command center down here because thanks to our Hellions, we have control all the way up to that front. So okay, we've conquered map control with Hellions. We're continuing to conquer map control with Vikings. And notice that we're sweeping, kind of, if you follow my mouse, we're sweeping up this way with our drop on the other side of it. Really easy, fun, clean drop defense. Almost always, you're going to want to get combat shield before stim. I would say the only exception is when you want to do one of these really fast drop plays. Marines and just ground-to-ground fights are always better. Like, a combat shield no-stim Marine is better than a stim no-combat shield Marine. Of course, with the exception of if you have these medevacs. So obviously, Puma just steps in here and just starts to deal a whole lot of damage. And the Vikings are so awesome. 2 Vikings, not 1. We shut down any drop we could possibly be up against. We can easily win in these Viking on Viking battles. We can pick off his medevacs. We can do all sorts of harm. And make him feel terrible about himself. This drop generally won't win you games. It can. It generally doesn't. But I want to stop and take a look at the position we're both in. Again, MMA is going for huge macro mode. Just the biggest ass macro mode ever. I mean, double engineering bays. I mean, we have 3 barracks. We have all the add-ons we want for all the necessary buildings. We have a 3rd coming up. But in the worker count, we see that Puma is a little bit ahead. Not hugely ahead, but he's a little bit ahead. The workers killed can be a little bit deceptive. The important thing is that we have this lead of a little bit of workers, but most importantly, we still have map control. We still sort of dominate the reach out into the map. Sure, there's a couple things from MMA, but this is sort of fragile at this point. And Puma can follow this up with another really nice fast push. And look, yeah, there was a Marine there, maybe to try to get a little bit of map control, but it's not going to be there for long. We continue to push out quite aggressively. Where are those superhero Vikings at? I wanna find those guys. They died. Oh no, our Vikings are such awesome units. Now, in terms of the advantages that we're going for with this particular build, the first big advantage that we went for is map control. And remember that little swap where we got our stims so incredibly early? This also allows us to get our combat shield incredibly early. So if we come to production, we actually see that Puma is on the verge of getting to an unlosable position. An unlosable position. He'll be crushing us in upgrades. I mean, hell, he still is. 1-1 versus our 1-0. Yuck. He's going to be crushing us in upgrades. He's going to have a better economy than us. We actually have the same buildings, 3 barracks, 1 factory, 1 starport. 3 barracks, 1 factory, 1 starport. The one edge we have is this combat shield upgrade. So you must make certain that you push very, very aggressively once you get this combat shield upgrade done. This is not a big force, but this is where your edge comes from. Right when your combat shield finishes with this build, you want to be pressing quite hard, getting into as many engagements as you can like this. Obviously, you have to be careful from some sort of siege mode tank ruining your day. Be careful with your leapfrogging, but notice that Puma, this push that he so desperately needs to make work before his opponent's combat shield was done, was able to start right here, all due to those early attack attempts. And then it's the slow chip forward. They're both making 5 Marines at a time, but we have our combat shield. We're scanning to make sure he doesn't have his yet. We're continuing to inch our way forwards. Yeah, we're taking ourselves a 3rd base, and we're adding on the barracks. We're starting to get a little bit more of a comfortable position, but my goodness, the help that happened due to that earlier combat shield upgrade, all the earlier map control we went for. And then one of these battles is just a kind of slow standard Terran versus Terran where you're just chipping away at each other. But now that we've all had the chance to watch this game the whole 100% of the way through, I'm actually going to come back and just blast through this really quickly. Alright, let's see if we can times 8 it. X8, aw yeah. Alright. Ha. At this point in time, right before we go through the re-review of the game, I'd like to note that this is the importance of having a simple, clean, clear plan. I just spent, let's see, 15.5 minutes going through details like when buildings were built, why things are important, where our edge is coming from, that we're identifying things like, oh, we made him build a Viking. That means it's great for us to be getting this stim early, and this is why it works. I'm going to blast through this simply, and we notice that whether you're doing an amazing job getting all your SCVs or your depots down, still just want to state it quite clearly. Quite clearly. Alright, sweet. Start off with this fast gas to get a really quick Banshee. We get Hellions to give us map control and to poke at his front. If we identify that he is, for some reason, going for some sort of expand play with just Marines, we harass a lot with our Banshee and continue to do this sort of drop play as normal with map control. If he is instead going for air, we successfully force him to make a Viking, and we use this opportunity to get a whole bunch of stim Marines really fast with drop. In the meantime, we're getting map control with all our Hellions. We're maintaining map control with our Vikings that are floating up here. And we do a big drop at his front that can win the game, will likely do damage, but most importantly, lets us begin a big tank push at the front. As our combat shield finishes up, we can commence that tank push at the front of his base, and because he is almost always going to be behind us in combat shield, we can win with this nice little push. We got into the position, we had the upgrades we wanted. Notice that at this point in time, we have 1-0 Marines. MMA can start 3-3. It's really, really close. It's really close. Even though MMA is looking really greedy, if MMA makes a couple of small, tiny adjustments, he has the whopping mother of all armies at the end of the game. You heard me talk about the combat shield for Puma's build. Oh, the combat shield. We want to make sure we're attacking when we have combat shield and he doesn't. MMA is thinking the exact same thing, but just for later. I'm going to get 3-3 upgrades when he's still at 2-2, or maybe even 2-1. And that's where my edge is going to be. It's always important that you know where your edges are. And now we're going to see MMA. If he did manage to do it, he would have had 3-3 by, like, what, 19 minutes? So sick. So sick. So good. I'm going to go on to part number 3 right now, where we're going to see Puma do the same opening, but he's going to do a different transition. Because you don't always want to be transitioning. You might not be able to exploit your edge. Or you might not have an edge to exploit. So let's go ahead and go into part 3 and see one last Terran vs. Terran opening from Puma that's wonderful. Aww, yeah!